Have you ever noticed we almost never hear about US military operations within Africa? And that might be for good reason, because the country of Niger is turning into a very severe situation for the US military that there might only be two options: to get out of the country or to stay and fight the local militant groups. Now, please stick with me for this video because we're going to be talking about the situation in Niger. And Niger has been a country that's really been able to lay under the radar for quite some time, but things are changing. We have Russian mercenary groups involved, we have local militant groups involved, China is kind of involved, and the US military needs to figure out what they're going to do. Now, I also have to put out a disclaimer. Due to YouTube policies, I can't use certain words when regarding the local militant groups. I'm going to be as specific as possible, but as we all know, things can be strict on here, so just know I'm going to be saying local militant groups, but I hope you know what I'm talking about. Now, why Niger of all places in Africa? What does Niger have to do with the United States, and what does Niger have to do with any local militant group? Well, we need to bring things back all the way to 2001, and I'm sure we all know what happened on home soil during 2001. We had those really bad attacks, you can't say the name on here, and because of that, all of military doctrine changed for the United States. We were no longer going to allow our country to get attacked by these militant groups. We are going to go to their isolated locations and take them out ourselves. So, when you look at Niger, it happens to be placed in almost the perfect position to where the militant group that was responsible for the attacks during 2001, they happen to be operating within that entire region of Africa. And Niger is also a really good location that would need help. You have to understand, even to this day, Niger is dirt poor. I mean, they are quite literally like the poorest country in the world. They also have 80% of the country covered in sand, the Sahara Desert, so they need help. The United States going into Niger just seemed like the best opportunity to help the local population and secure the region. Now, what's really difficult to pinpoint all the way back in 2002 and the mid-2000s, we don't know exactly what the US military was doing within Niger. But it's very safe to assume that the US military was operating within Niger and training local militant groups, helping to form the US government into a strong, secure force. And I am basing this off the fact that this is Special Forces 101, because that's who was operating in Niger, with Special Forces and CIA. Their job is to secure local populations and to get them in our favor so that they love the United States and they want to attack the other militant groups. So again, I'm sorry, I can't really find any documentation that gives me full-on evidence of what exactly was going on in Niger, but nonetheless, we start to see things not going in favor of the United States. Because remember how I said Niger is in the perfect location to be in the middle of all the action? It's also in the perfect location for anybody who wants to leave the surrounding action and hide in Niger because the US military is in Niger. And long story short, in 2011 Mali, we start to see a major uptick in militant group action. We start to see local villages being taken out, and it's not looking good for Mali, it's not looking good for Chad, the surrounding countries, and local populations of good guys are starting to hide in Niger. So because of this, Niger, already being a poor country, is essentially turning themselves into a humanitarian crisis. I mean, who's going to feed all these people? Who's going to give them work? And the US military seems to be smack dab in the middle of all of this. Now, fast forward to 2014, we have this really famous militant group. I can't say their name. It starts with an I. They start to become popular in Africa, and they start to become a problem for the United States. And we hear about them operating in Syria and Iraq, but you never really heard about them operating within Africa unless you did your research. And then all of a sudden, the whole world is looking at Niger. We have what's called the Tongo Tongo ambush in 2017. And long story short, there were U.S. Special Forces members who were on an operation to go find a local militant group leader. They were going to go capture him. And the risk assessment was that everything's okay, you guys are good to go, but they were severely outnumbered and ambushed. And I want to play you some clips of what the aftermath was and what the tone was from the U.S. military.
All of our soldiers fought valiantly that day. And there were a series of contributing factors to what occurred in Tongo Tongo, but none of those contributing factors are the direct cause of the enemy attack in Tongo Tongo. The direct cause of the enemy attack in Tongo Tongo is that the enemy achieved tactical surprise there, and our forces were outnumbered approximately 3-1. There was the concept of operation that was not properly characterized, and then there were some processes at all levels of the chain of command that need to be improved.
So I would just say in summation, we've done a holistic review top to bottom of where we can improve, and we've tried to implement those actions. And we owe the Secretary of Defense, AFRICOM, Special Operations Command out of Tampa, and the U.S. Army owe feedback to the Secretary here in the middle of the month of August on what we've done with the findings of that investigation.
You will notice this tone of miscalculation or, oops, we made a mistake, but it was a very bad mistake. But this mistake raised an escalation of force for the U.S. military within Niger and the region. Because what's really interesting about the Tongo Tongo ambush, it was literally being watched by a drone, but the drone was unarmed. You see, Niger has two major bases where we have drones located for the U.S. military. And these bases are used to launch drones that are unarmed, remember that, to pretty much surveillance the surrounding regions, give intel to governments, and really to use it for training for the US military as well. Because remember, the risk assessment before the Tongo Tongo ambush, nothing was really that dangerous going on in Niger, like nothing should have ever happened to any troops within Niger. But since there was a realization that the drones were unarmed in Niger and the surrounding regions, all of a sudden, the Niger government gave the okay to start arming drones for the region. And again, this is classified as an escalation of force. Now, after the whole Tongo Tongo ambush, we essentially start to see investigators looking into what is going on in Niger. We even have public admissions of senators not knowing that we had troops in Niger. So after Tongo Tongo, things laid pretty low. In fact, nobody really heard about Niger for a while, up until Mali started to fall apart. And one country who was sort of in charge of the security of Mali was France. Now, combat operations were going on from 2014 to 2022 in Mali, and I know that overlaps the whole Tongo Tongo operation, and things were kind of public, not public. Mali was essentially like France's Afghanistan, if we're going to compare anything. And essentially, in 2022, France had to leave. Like, they had to get out of there because Mali was being overrun with militant groups. But where things take a turn is that Russia all of a sudden opened the door of opportunity. Because we all know them, they are the famous mercenary group Wagner Group. They somehow managed to insert themselves into African conflicts and to help local populations and government. And Wagner managed to do the best smear campaign I've ever seen on a country. Let me just show you exactly what I'm talking about.
The afternoon, French military saw those vehicles, those Chinese-made vehicles that are used by the Malian army going into and outside the base of Gossi that the French left on the 19th. Slept at the base, and we have it here. Here we see the Malian soldiers sleeping outside, and downstairs we see Russian, as the French military say, Wagner operatives sleeping in tents. And the same night at 10 p.m. we have a first tweet from a fake Twitter account, and we can see it too, that says, look up what we will show you. We'll show you the massacre left by French soldiers. And here you see the military putting sand on some corpses here. And
Wagner's smear campaign quite literally destroyed the relationship France could ever have with any of those African countries. Even though France proved them to be wrong, it's not like those people are really going out of their way to figure out the situation. Because in Mali, Wagner Group is actually liked, which seems to be the direct opposite of what we think about Wagner in the West. When you hear about Wagner Group in the West, you hear about their operations within Ukraine and how they're doing things they're not supposed to be doing. Things are different in Mali. They love them in Mali because they are securing the country. But again, what does that have to do with Niger? It has to do everything with Niger and the surrounding region, because Wagner is pushing everybody out of Mali and into Niger. In fact, this is actually rather bizarre. Wagner Group even offered the United States, hey, we will work together. You know what? We'll actually do the job for you if you just fund our operations within the region. Because now we have a strange dichotomy. We have Russian Wagner Group who's trying to do their job, but they're very aggressive about it. We have US Special Operations trying to do their job, and they're sort of meeting in the middle on the border. They are fighting the same group, but the US military is almost taking responsibilities for the failures of Niger. Because if we're going to judge a book by its cover, who was there first? The United States. And the local population is not like digging into the research. They're just trying to survive. And when the US military is there, things are supposed to be great. We are supposed to be safe. But why are militant groups entering Niger? Why do we have an influx of refugees hiding from Wagner, hiding from militant groups, and they're hiding within Niger? This is like a very serious situation because, again, what is the US military going to do? They initially entered there in 2002 to help secure the region, but now all of a sudden it's turning into a humanitarian crisis? And here's where things get even worse. The US military might be too deep into their operation to get out of Niger. Because we already know what happens when the US military has been involved with a country and then all of a sudden they pull out. You have a situation like Afghanistan. But where things are even worse for Niger, Russia can swoop right in, and the US military and the United States will lose forever credibility within any African nation ever. And then we have Russia, who can enter into these territories and do whatever they want. They will have strategic regions to where they have perfect placement to either counterflank all of Europe or to set up shop in Africa and do whatever they want to do. Now, one thing the United States is trying to do to counterbalance all of this, they sort of are making things a little more public. Like, we just had some really big war games in the region, and I think the US military is just trying to show that we mean business, we are willing to spend money on the local government and the local military, and we really want to help everyone out. And don't get me wrong, I think the US military is truly there to help out. I just don't think they ever foresaw a situation where France would completely crumble within Mali and then all of a sudden Russia became like the main source of protection for the Africans in that region. So that's essentially what's going on within Niger. It's not looking good. It's not looking like a positive thing for the US military. Nonetheless, that's what's happening. Please leave your comments and opinions down below. I'm curious if you guys learned something. Maybe some of you already knew this. This is a topic I'm rather interested in because no one really talks about it, but it's been happening for a long time.